The sound of my 3-year-old daughter screaming in pain as my brother yanked her arm with such force that her feet left the ground will haunt me forever. What happened next changed our family dynamics permanently when my Coast Guard general father witnessed the entire incident and delivered consequences that transformed not just my brother's behavior, but revealed truths about family accountability that I never expected to learn. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I am Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how one devastating moment of family violence became the catalyst for establishing boundaries, demanding respect, and discovering that sometimes the people we least expect will stand up for what is right when those closest to us fail to protect the innocent. The Mitchell family had always operated according to unspoken hierarchies that placed maintaining family unity above addressing individual accountability. Growing up as the middle child between my older brother Derek and younger sister Amanda, I had learned early that keeping peace often meant accepting behavior that would be unacceptable in any other context. Our family gatherings followed predictable patterns established over decades of tradition. Every third Sunday, we would converge at our parents' expansive home in Virginia Beach, where my father, General Robert Mitchell, had settled after his distinguished Coast Guard career reached its pinnacle with his appointment to oversee regional maritime security operations. These monthly reunions represented sacred time in our family culture, where career demands, geographic distance, and the complexities of adult life were temporarily suspended in favor of shared meals, childhood memories, and the comfortable rhythms of multi-generational interaction. My mother, Catherine Mitchell, orchestrated these gatherings with military precision that matched her husband's professional approach to complex logistics. The dynamics that governed our family interactions had been established during our childhood and had persisted largely unchanged despite our transitions into independent. The catalyst for the incident had been Emma's natural 3-year-old behavior of exploring boundaries and testing limits in an environment where she felt safe and loved. She had been playing in the living room while the adults prepared dinner, moving between conversations and seeking attention from various family members who indulged her requests for interaction. Derek's mood had been deteriorating throughout the afternoon as Jennifer maintained her polite but distant demeanor, and my parents made careful inquiries about their relationship status. The pharmaceutical industry pressures that my mother had mentioned were clearly affecting his emotional regulation, though none of us understood the full extent of his stress levels. The breaking point occurred when Emma, in her typical toddler fashion, became fixated on a decorative item on my mother's coffee table that had been declared off-limits earlier in the afternoon. Her persistence in returning to investigate the forbidden object represented normal developmental behavior for a child her age, but Derek interpreted it as deliberate defiance that required immediate correction. "Emma, I told you not to touch that," Derek said, his voice carrying an edge that immediately caught my attention from across the room. His tone was sharper than appropriate for addressing a 3-year-old, but it was not yet concerning enough to warrant intervention from the adults who were observing the interaction. Emma's response was typical for her age and temperament. She looked at Derek with the calculating expression that toddlers display when determining whether adult commands are negotiable, then reached toward the decorative item, with the deliberate slowness of someone testing boundaries. What happened next occurred so quickly that the full significance of Derek's action was not immediately apparent to everyone present. In a moment of uncontrolled frustration, he grabbed Emma's arm and yanked her away from the coffee table with such force that her feet left the ground, and her shoulder was visibly twisted in an unnatural position. The sound Emma made was not the typical cry of a frustrated toddler, but the scream of genuine pain and terror that immediately activated every protective instinct I possessed as her mother. The sight of my daughter being physically manhandled by my own brother created a surge of maternal rage that overrode every consideration of family harmony and social appropriateness. "Derek, what are you doing?" I shouted, moving toward Emma, who was now sobbing in a way that indicated actual injury rather than emotional upset. The force he had used was completely disproportionate to the situation and inappropriate for correcting any child, regardless of their behavior. Derek's immediate response revealed his awareness that his action had crossed significant boundaries. Rather than showing concern for Emma's condition or offering an apology for using excessive force, he became defensive and attempted to justify his behavior through criticism of my parenting approach. "She needs to learn to listen when adults give her instructions," Derek said, his voice carrying the aggressive tone of someone who knows they are wrong but refuses to admit it. "You let her get away with too much, and she thinks rules do not apply to her." The statement demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of child development and revealed his inability to take responsibility for his inappropriate response to normal toddler behavior. His attempt to redirect blame toward my parenting created additional offense while failing to address the immediate concern about Emma's physical condition. My father had been in the kitchen during the initial incident, but Emma's screams and the subsequent argument had drawn his attention to the living room, where he arrived in time to witness Derek's defensive justification and my attempts to comfort my injured daughter. General Mitchell's assessment of the situation was immediate and decisive in ways that reflected his military training and leadership experience. His evaluation process was methodical, beginning with determining Emma's condition and establishing the facts of what had occurred before addressing the inappropriate behavior that had caused the incident. The transformation in my father's demeanor was unlike anything I had ever witnessed during family interactions. The gentle grandfather who indulged Emma's requests and participated in her games was replaced by the commanding officer who had earned respect through decades of decisive leadership in challenging situations. "Derek, explain to me exactly what just happened," General Mitchell said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded subordinates throughout his distinguished career. The tone left no doubt that evasion or justification would be unacceptable, and that honest accountability was the only appropriate response. Derek's attempt to maintain his defensive position immediately crumbled under the weight of his father's authoritative demand for truth. The charm and humor that typically enabled him to avoid consequences proved completely ineffective when confronted by someone who possessed both the moral authority and professional experience to demand accountability. What followed would reshape our family dynamics permanently and establish new standards for acceptable behavior that prioritized protection of the vulnerable over maintenance of comfortable traditions. The intervention that was about to unfold would demonstrate that sometimes justice requires disrupting established patterns, even when those patterns have provided stability for decades. The true measure of family loyalty would prove to be protection of those who cannot protect themselves, rather than enabling harmful behavior for the sake of maintaining surface-level harmony. Adulthood. Derek, now 35 and working as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, maintained the privileged position he had enjoyed as the eldest son who could seemingly do no wrong in our parents' estimation. My position as the responsible middle child had been reinforced through years of academic achievement, military service, and careful adherence to family expectations. My career as a Coast Guard officer had earned respect from my father, while my role as a devoted mother to my daughter Emma provided validation from my mother, who valued traditional family structures above most other considerations. Derek's relationship with authority had always been complicated by his ability to charm his way out of consequences through humor, apologies, and promises of future improvement that were rarely fulfilled. This pattern had been established during our teenage years and had continued into his adult relationships, including his marriage to Jennifer, who had learned to manage his impulsive behavior through careful avoidance of triggering situations. The warning signs of Derek's inability to regulate his emotions around children had been present for months, but they had been dismissed or rationalized by family members who preferred maintaining harmony to addressing uncomfortable truths about his character. His interactions with Emma during previous family gatherings had included moments of inappropriate impatience and unnecessarily harsh corrections that I had noted but failed to address directly. "Derek seems stressed lately," my mother would observe when his behavior toward Emma became noticeably aggressive. "The pharmaceutical industry has been challenging, and Jennifer mentioned they are having some marital difficulties. We should be patient with him during this difficult period." These rationalizations served to excuse behavior that was becoming increasingly concerning while placing responsibility on external circumstances rather than personal accountability. The family's investment in Derek's reputation as someone who was fundamentally good, but temporarily struggling, prevented honest evaluation of patterns that were escalating in severity. My father's approach to family management reflected his military background, where clear hierarchies and established protocols governed most interactions. However, his leadership style at home differed significantly from his professional approach, as he often deferred to my mother's preferences for avoiding confrontation in favor of maintaining surface-level harmony. General Mitchell commanded respect through decades of distinguished service that had taken our family to duty stations across the country before his final assignment brought us to Virginia. His reputation for decisive leadership in crisis situations was legendary among his peers, but family dynamics often revealed a different approach that prioritized stability over justice. Emma, my 3-year-old daughter, represented the newest generation of Mitchell family members and had quickly become the center of attention during our monthly gatherings. Her bright personality and natural curiosity made her a favorite among the adults, though her typical toddler behavior occasionally tested the patience of family members who had forgotten the realities of managing young children. My relationship with Derek had been cordial but distant throughout our adult years, characterized by the surface-level pleasantries that often define sibling relationships when geographic separation and different life paths create natural boundaries. Our interactions during family gatherings followed established scripts that avoided controversial topics while maintaining the appearance of brotherly affection. The specific Sunday when everything changed had begun like countless others, with the familiar rituals of arrival, meal preparation, and the comfortable chaos that accompanies multi-generational gatherings. Emma had been particularly energetic that morning, excited about seeing her grandparents and exploring their large backyard, which offered adventures that our smaller apartment could not provide. Derek and Jennifer had arrived later than usual, and the tension between them was immediately apparent to anyone paying attention to their carefully controlled interactions. Their conversation was limited to logistical coordination and polite responses to questions from other family members, creating an atmosphere of suppressed conflict that affected the mood of the entire gathering. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The silence that followed General Mitchell's demand for explanation stretched across the living room like a battlefield, where the outcome would determine the future of our family relationships. Derek's face shifted through a series of expressions as he realized that his usual charm offensive would not be sufficient to navigate the crisis he had created through his violent treatment of my daughter. Emma continued sobbing in my arms, her small body trembling with the aftershocks of pain and terror that Derek's aggressive action had inflicted. The sound of her distress created an emotional urgency that demanded immediate resolution, yet the complexity of family dynamics made simple solutions impossible to implement. "I was trying to teach her proper behavior," Derek began, his voice lacking the conviction that had characterized his earlier defensive statements. The presence of our father, whose military bearing commanded respect even in civilian settings, had fundamentally altered the power dynamics that normally governed our family interactions. General Mitchell's response demonstrated the leadership principles that had shaped his distinguished career and earned him recognition as someone capable of making difficult decisions under pressure. His approach to the situation reflected decades of experience in evaluating personnel, assessing threats, and implementing corrective action when institutional standards had been violated. Teaching proper behavior does not involve using physical force that causes pain and fear in a 3-year-old child, my father stated with the clarity that characterized his professional communication style. Your action was inappropriate, dangerous, and completely unacceptable, regardless of the circumstances that preceded it. Quote, the directness of this assessment eliminated any possibility for Derek to continue his attempts at justification, while establishing clear standards for accountability that would govern the remainder of the conversation. My father's military background had provided him with frameworks for addressing misconduct that transcended family relationships and personal emotions. Derek's reaction revealed the psychological mechanisms he had developed over years of avoiding responsibility for actions that caused harm to others. Rather than acknowledging the inappropriateness of his behavior or expressing concern for Emma's well-being, he attempted to shift focus toward external factors that he claimed had contributed to his loss of emotional control. You do not understand the pressure I have been under at work, Derek said, his voice taking on the plaintive tone he had used since childhood when seeking sympathy rather than accepting consequences. Jennifer and I are having serious problems, and I have been dealing with impossible clients who make unreasonable demands every single day. The attempt to redirect attention from his actions toward his personal circumstances demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of accountability that my father immediately recognized and addressed. General Mitchell's experience in evaluating personnel had taught him to distinguish between explanations that provided context and excuses that attempted to transfer responsibility for harmful behavior. "Your work stress and marital problems are completely irrelevant to your treatment of Emma," my father replied, his tone conveying the professional detachment that enabled effective leadership during crisis situations. "Personal difficulties do not justify harming children, and responsible adults manage their emotions regardless of external pressures." This response established principles that would govern not only the immediate situation, but future family interactions where similar issues might arise. The standards my father articulated reflected values that had guided his military service, and that he was now applying to civilian circumstances that demanded equally clear moral boundaries. My mother's reaction to the confrontation revealed the competing loyalties that often complicate family crisis management. Catherine Mitchell had spent decades mediating conflicts between family members through diplomatic approaches that prioritized harmony over accountability. But the severity of Derek's action had created a situation where her usual strategies proved inadequate. "Perhaps we should all take a moment to calm down before discussing this further," my mother suggested, her voice carrying the controlled tension of someone attempting to manage multiple competing interests simultaneously. Family arguments should not escalate to the point where relationships are permanently damaged over misunderstandings. The characterization of Derek's violent treatment of Emma as a misunderstanding demonstrated how deeply ingrained patterns of enabling behavior had become within our family system. My mother's instinctive response was to minimize the severity of what had occurred in order to preserve the stability that she valued above individual accountability. General Mitchell's response to his wife's intervention revealed the firmness of his position and his determination to address the incident according to principles that transcended family politics. His military training had taught him that certain violations of standards required immediate and decisive response regardless of personal relationships or institutional convenience. "This is not a misunderstanding, Catherine," my father said, his voice maintaining the respectful tone he always used with my mother while clearly establishing his position on the matter. "This is a case of an adult using inappropriate physical force against a child, and it requires direct accountability rather than diplomatic management." The clarity of this statement eliminated any possibility for the incident to be reframed as a minor family disagreement that could be resolved through traditional conflict avoidance strategies. My father's position established that certain behaviors were unacceptable regardless of family relationships, and that protecting Emma took precedence over maintaining comfortable dynamics. Jennifer's silence during the confrontation spoke volumes about the marital dynamics that had contributed to Derek's escalating behavioral problems. Her presence at family gatherings had become increasingly uncomfortable as Derek's inability to manage stress manifested in ways that embarrassed her and complicated their relationship with my parents. The pharmaceutical industry pressures that my mother had mentioned were clearly affecting Derek more severely than any of us had understood. But Jennifer's careful distance from her husband suggested that his behavioral problems extended beyond occasional outbursts to patterns that she had been managing privately for some time. Derek's next attempt at deflection revealed the depth of his unwillingness to accept responsibility for actions that had caused genuine harm to my daughter. Rather than acknowledging Emma's pain or apologizing for his inappropriate response, he attempted to criticize my parenting approach as justification for his violent intervention. "Sarah lets Emma get away with behavior that would not be tolerated in properly managed households," Derek continued, his voice carrying increasing desperation as his usual escape routes proved ineffective. "Children need consistent discipline, and someone has to establish appropriate boundaries when parents fail to do so." This statement crossed several additional lines by implying that his violent action had been necessary due to my inadequate parenting, and that he possessed authority to physically discipline my child according to his personal standards. The presumption revealed attitudes that extended far beyond a momentary loss of emotional control to fundamental misunderstandings about appropriate boundaries. My response to Derek's criticism of my parenting reflected the maternal protective instincts that his action had activated, and my determination to establish clear boundaries around my daughter's safety. The combination of professional training and personal outrage created a clarity that cut through family diplomatic considerations to address the core issues directly. Derek, you have no authority to physically discipline my daughter under any circumstances, I stated, my voice carrying the command presence that Coast Guard training had developed through years of leadership responsibilities. Your opinion of my parenting is irrelevant, and your action was assault against a 3-year-old child. The use of legal terminology to describe Derek's behavior eliminated any remaining ambiguity about the seriousness of what had occurred, and established that his action constituted criminal behavior rather than acceptable family conflict. This framing would prove crucial to the accountability measures that would follow. General Mitchell's assessment of the situation continued with the systematic approach that had characterized his military decision-making throughout his career. His evaluation process included not only the immediate incident, but the broader patterns of behavior and family dynamics that had enabled the situation to develop to this point. Derek, your behavior today represents a fundamental failure of character that requires immediate correction, my father stated with the authority that had commanded respect throughout his distinguished career. The fact that you continue attempting to justify harming a child rather than taking responsibility demonstrates that this incident reflects deeper problems that must be addressed. This assessment expanded the scope of accountability beyond the immediate incident to examine the character issues that had enabled Derek's inappropriate action. My father's military experience had taught him to identify systemic problems that required comprehensive solutions rather than superficial corrections. The psychological dynamics revealed through Derek's defensive responses provided insight into behavior patterns that had been developing over years, but had been obscured by family's investment in maintaining positive relationships. His inability to accept responsibility when confronted with clear evidence of wrongdoing suggested pathological elements that extended beyond ordinary character flaws. Derek's final attempt at manipulation involved appealing directly to family loyalty and suggesting that holding him accountable would damage relationships that had been stable for decades. This strategy had proven effective in previous situations where his behavior had crossed boundaries but had not resulted in visible harm to vulnerable family members. You are all acting like I committed some terrible crime instead of correcting a child who was misbehaving, Derek said, his voice now carrying the anger that typically emerged when his charm and manipulation failed to achieve desired outcomes. This family has always supported each other through difficult times, and I expect the same consideration. The appeal to family loyalty revealed Derek's fundamental misunderstanding of what loyalty actually required in situations where family members engage in harmful behavior. His expectation that support should take precedence over accountability demonstrated the entitled thinking that had enabled his escalating behavioral problems. General Mitchell's response to this final manipulation attempt established principles that would govern future family relationships and created clear standards for acceptable behavior that transcended traditional loyalty considerations. His military background had provided frameworks for addressing misconduct that prioritized institutional integrity over personal relationships. Family loyalty requires protecting the vulnerable from harm, not enabling harmful behavior for the sake of avoiding conflict. My father stated with the finality that characterized his most important leadership decisions. Your expectation that we should overlook violence against a child demonstrates that you fundamentally misunderstand what family responsibility actually means. This statement represented a philosophical shift in family dynamics that would have lasting implications for how accountability was managed and what standards would govern future interactions. The principles my father articulated reflected values that had guided his military service and that he was now applying to civilian relationships. Emma's continued distress served as a constant reminder of the real-world consequences of Derek's action and the immediate need for resolution that prioritized her well-being over family diplomatic considerations. Her pain provided moral clarity that cut through competing loyalties to establish clear priorities for addressing the crisis. The examination of Emma's arm revealed bruising that confirmed the excessive force Derek had used and provided physical evidence that his action had caused genuine injury rather than momentary discomfort. The visible proof of harm eliminated any remaining possibility for minimizing the severity of what had occurred. My determination to document Emma's injuries reflected both maternal protective instincts and professional training that emphasized the importance of creating accurate records when misconduct had resulted in harm. The photographs I took would serve as evidence if formal accountability measures became necessary. Derek's reaction to my documentation efforts revealed his growing awareness that the situation was escalating beyond family conflict management to potential legal consequences. His attempts to discourage record-keeping demonstrated understanding that his action could result in formal sanctions if reported to appropriate authorities. General Mitchell's observation of the documentation process and his approval of creating comprehensive records indicated his assessment that the situation required formal rather than informal resolution. His military experience had taught him the importance of accurate documentation when addressing serious misconduct. The transformation in family dynamics that began with Derek's violent action against Emma represented a fundamental shift from diplomatic conflict avoidance to principled accountability that would reshape relationships permanently. The incident had revealed incompatible values that could not be reconciled through traditional family harmony strategies. The recognition that protecting Emma required challenging established family patterns marked the beginning of a difficult but necessary process of establishing new standards for acceptable behavior. The comfort of familiar dynamics would be sacrificed to ensure the safety of the most vulnerable family member. The confrontation had revealed that true family loyalty sometimes requires difficult conversations and uncomfortable accountability measures that disrupt established patterns. The courage to protect the innocent would prove more important than the comfort of avoiding conflict. The week following the confrontation at my parents' home revealed the psychological mechanisms that Derek employed to avoid accepting responsibility for his violent treatment of Emma. Rather than reflecting on the seriousness of his actions or seeking help for the behavioral problems that had culminated in harming a child, he launched a systematic campaign to reframe the incident and rally family members to his defense. Derek's first strategy involved minimizing the severity of what had occurred by characterizing his violent action as a minor disciplinary correction that had been misinterpreted by family members who lacked understanding of effective child management techniques. This revisionist narrative required ignoring the visible bruising on Emma's arm and the terror she had experienced during the assault. The phone calls began on Monday morning, less than 24 hours after General Mitchell had established clear expectations for Derek's accountability. My mother received the first contact, during which Derek presented himself as the victim of an overreaction that threatened to destroy family relationships over what he described as a simple misunderstanding. "Mom, everyone is acting like I committed some horrible crime when all I did was move Emma away from something she was not supposed to touch," Derek explained during a conversation that my mother later recounted to me with obvious distress. "Sarah has always been overly protective, and now she has Dad convinced that I am some kind of dangerous person." The manipulation inherent in this characterization was sophisticated in its appeal to my mother's natural desire to maintain family harmony while simultaneously attacking my credibility as both a mother and a reliable witness to what had actually occurred. Derek understood that my mother's investment in family stability made her vulnerable to narratives that minimized conflict. Catherine Mitchell's response to Derek's manipulation revealed the internal conflict between her desire to support all her children and her recognition that his behavior had crossed unacceptable boundaries. Her diplomatic training as a military spouse had taught her to seek compromise solutions, but the severity of Derek's action challenged traditional conflict resolution approaches. "Derek, your father witnessed what happened, and he was very concerned about the force you used," my mother replied, attempting to maintain neutrality while acknowledging the seriousness of the situation. "Perhaps you should consider that your stress levels have affected your judgment and seek some professional guidance to help manage these pressures." The suggestion that Derek pursue counseling represented my mother's attempt to address the underlying issues while providing a pathway for family reconciliation that did not require complete admission of wrongdoing. Her approach reflected the diplomatic solutions that had successfully managed previous family conflicts, though this situation demanded more decisive accountability measures. Derek's rejection of counseling recommendations revealed his commitment to avoiding any acknowledgement that his behavior represented a personal problem requiring professional intervention. His resistance to therapeutic support demonstrated the depth of his denial and his determination to maintain the narrative that external circumstances rather than internal character issues had caused the incident. "I do not need counseling because I did not do anything wrong," Derek responded with the defensive anger that emerged whenever his behavior was questioned. "What I need is for this family to stop treating me like a criminal and start supporting me during a difficult period in my life." This statement encapsulated Derek's fundamental misunderstanding of accountability and his expectation that family loyalty should override concerns about child safety. His demand for support while refusing to acknowledge wrongdoing created an impossible situation that required family members to choose between enabling harmful behavior or establishing appropriate boundaries. My sister Amanda received similar phone calls throughout the week, during which Derek attempted to recruit her support by appealing to sibling loyalty and suggesting that my reaction to his behavior had been motivated by long-standing jealousy and competition rather than genuine concern for Emma's welfare. "Sarah has always resented my relationship with our parents," Derek told Amanda during a conversation that was designed to create division among siblings while deflecting attention from his own actions. "Now she is using this incident to turn everyone against me and position herself as the perfect daughter who can do no wrong." The attempt to reframe his assault on Emma as evidence of sibling rivalry demonstrated Derek's skill at psychological manipulation and his willingness to sacrifice family relationships to avoid accountability. His strategy required portraying legitimate concerns about child safety as personal vendetta, motivated by competitive dynamics. Amanda's response to Derek's manipulation attempts reflected her own struggles with family loyalty and her growing recognition that his behavior had become increasingly problematic over recent years. Her perspective as someone who had observed Derek's interactions with children during previous family gatherings provided important context for evaluating his claims of innocence. "Derek, I have seen how you react when you get frustrated with kids, and it has been concerning for a while," Amanda replied with the honesty that characterized her communication style. "What happened with Emma was not about Sarah overreacting. It was about you using too much force with a 3-year-old who was just being a normal toddler." Amanda's refusal to support Derek's revisionist narrative represented a significant obstacle to his campaign for family allies, as her validation of the incident's seriousness undermined his attempts to characterize the concern as isolated overreaction from immediate family members. Jennifer's position during this period was particularly complex, as she possessed intimate knowledge of Derek's behavioral patterns, while also having to navigate the potential consequences of his actions for their marriage and their standing within the extended family. Her silence during the initial confrontation had been strategic rather than supportive. The conversations between Derek and Jennifer during the week following the incident revealed the marital dynamics that had contributed to his escalating behavioral problems and her growing recognition that his inability to manage emotions posed risks that extended beyond their relationship to affect innocent family members. "Derek, you need to understand that what you did to Emma was not acceptable, and your refusal to acknowledge that fact is making everything worse," Jennifer told him during a discussion that I learned about through Amanda, who had become Jennifer's confidant during this difficult period. Jennifer's willingness to confront Derek privately, while maintaining public discretion, reflected her assessment that his behavior required intervention, while her marriage required careful management to survive the crisis. Her position as both witness and potential victim of his emotional volatility created competing loyalties that complicated her response options. Derek's reaction to criticism from his own wife revealed the extent of his psychological investment in maintaining innocence and his willingness to sacrifice important relationships, rather than accept responsibility for behavior that had caused genuine harm to a family member. "Even you are turning against me," Derek accused Jennifer during an argument that escalated to the point where she temporarily moved to her sister's home for safety. "I thought I could count on my wife to support me when my own family was attacking me, but apparently everyone wants to see me destroyed." The characterization of accountability as destruction demonstrated Derek's inability to distinguish between consequences for harmful behavior and persecution by family members, who were motivated by malice rather than concern for child safety. His victim mentality prevented recognition of opportunities for growth and relationship repair. General Mitchell's response to Derek's manipulation campaign reflected his military training in identifying and countering disinformation efforts that were designed to undermine institutional authority and avoid accountability for misconduct. His experience in personnel management had provided frameworks for addressing resistance to corrective action. Derek's attempts to reframe this incident are consistent with behavior patterns that we have observed over many years. My father explained during a private conversation where he shared his assessment of the situation. His inability to accept responsibility when his actions cause harm represents a character issue that requires direct intervention rather than diplomatic management. The clinical nature of my father's evaluation reflected his professional approach to addressing personnel problems, while his personal investment as Emma's grandfather provided emotional motivation for ensuring appropriate resolution. His dual perspective as both military leader and family patriarch created unique authority for managing the crisis. My father's decision to document Derek's manipulation attempts and resistance to accountability demonstrated his assessment that formal rather than informal corrective measures would be necessary to address the underlying behavioral problems. His military experience had taught him to create comprehensive records when dealing with personnel who exhibited patterns of misconduct. The extended family's reaction to news of the incident revealed varying degrees of understanding about child development, family accountability, and appropriate responses to domestic violence. Some relatives expressed support for Derek based on traditional assumptions about family loyalty, while others recognized the seriousness of his actions. My Aunt Margaret, who had worked as a pediatric nurse for over 30 years, provided professional perspective that validated concerns about Derek's behavior and reinforced the appropriateness of holding him accountable for actions that could have caused serious injury to Emma. The force required to lift a 3-year-old off the ground by yanking her arm could easily result in shoulder dislocation or fracture. Margaret explained during a family phone conference that my mother had organized to discuss the situation. Derek's action was not simply inappropriate discipline. It was assault that could have caused permanent injury. The medical perspective provided by someone with professional expertise in child safety eliminated any remaining ambiguity about the severity of Derek's behavior and the appropriateness of family concern. Margaret's assessment supported the position that accountability rather than reconciliation should be the immediate priority. Derek's response to professional validation of family concerns revealed his desperation to maintain his innocence narrative and his willingness to attack the credibility of family members who possessed expertise that contradicted his claims of appropriate behavior. Margaret has always disliked me because she thinks I am not good enough for this family, Derek told anyone who would listen, attempting to undermine her professional assessment through personal attack rather than factual rebuttal. She is using her nursing background to make my actions sound worse than they actually were. The ad hominem attack on Margaret's credibility demonstrated Derek's recognition that professional evaluation posed a significant threat to his manipulation campaign, while revealing his willingness to damage relationships with extended family members to maintain his denial. My own response to Derek's manipulation campaign involved maintaining careful documentation of his statements and actions while refusing to engage in defensive arguments that would legitimize his revisionist narrative. My military training had provided frameworks for dealing with personnel who attempted to avoid accountability through psychological manipulation. The decision to limit contact with Derek until he demonstrated genuine accountability reflected both protective instincts regarding Emma's safety and strategic assessment that engagement with his manipulation efforts would be counterproductive. Setting clear boundaries required accepting that family relationships might be permanently damaged. Derek's escalation of manipulation efforts in response to family boundary setting revealed the desperation that accompanied his recognition that traditional charm offensive strategies were proving ineffective. His increasingly aggressive attempts to recruit allies demonstrated awareness that isolation was the likely consequence of continued denial. The pattern of behavior that emerged during this week of resistance and denial provided clear evidence that Derek's assault on Emma represented symptomatic behavior rather than isolated incident. His systematic approach to avoiding accountability suggested psychological issues that required professional intervention rather than family management. The recognition that Derek's behavioral problems extended beyond anger management to fundamental character defects marked a turning point in family understanding of the challenges involved in ensuring Emma's safety during future interactions. Traditional family harmony strategies were proving inadequate for addressing the underlying issues. The week concluded with Derek's complete isolation from family support, as his manipulation campaign failed to recruit allies willing to prioritize his comfort over Emma's safety. The consequences of his resistance to accountability were beginning to accumulate in ways that would force reconsideration of his approach to the crisis he had created through his violent behavior. The consequences of Derek's refusal to accept accountability began manifesting in ways that extended far beyond family relationships to affect his professional standing, social connections, and marriage stability. His systematic denial and manipulation campaign had failed to recruit the family allies he needed to maintain his narrative of innocence, leaving him increasingly isolated while facing mounting pressure from multiple directions. The first significant escalation occurred when Jennifer made the decision to separate from Derek permanently, rather than continue managing the emotional volatility that had culminated in his assault on Emma. Her departure from their shared residence represented more than marital discord. It constituted professional recognition that Derek's behavioral problems posed risks that she could no longer justify accepting. Jennifer's background as a licensed clinical social worker provided her with expertise in recognizing patterns of escalating aggression and assessing risk factors for continued violence. Her professional training had taught her to distinguish between isolated incidents and systematic behavioral problems that required intervention rather than management through careful avoidance strategies. Derek's reaction to being held accountable for hurting Emma has revealed character issues that I cannot continue to overlook, Jennifer explained during a private conversation with my mother, who had hoped that marital counseling might provide solutions for their relationship problems. His inability to acknowledge wrongdoing when presented with clear evidence represents psychological patterns that pose ongoing risks. The clinical assessment from someone with professional expertise in behavioral evaluation carried significant weight within our family and eliminated any remaining possibility that Derek's actions could be attributed to temporary stress rather than fundamental character defects. Jennifer's departure validated the concerns that General Mitchell had expressed about deeper problems requiring comprehensive intervention. Derek's response to Jennifer's separation decision revealed the extent of his psychological investment in maintaining victim status rather than accepting responsibility for the consequences his behavior had generated. Rather than recognizing her departure as a natural result of his actions, he interpreted it as further evidence of a conspiracy designed to destroy his reputation and relationships. Even my own wife has been turned against me by Sarah's lies and Dad's military authoritarian approach. Derek complained to anyone willing to listen, demonstrating his continued inability to connect his behavior to the consequences he was experiencing. This family has decided to sacrifice me to protect Sarah's perfect mother image, and Jennifer is too weak to stand up to the pressure. The characterization of accountability as persecution revealed Derek's fundamental misunderstanding of cause and effect relationships, while his attack on Jennifer's character demonstrated his willingness to damage important relationships rather than examine his own contribution to the crisis. His narrative required portraying everyone else as either conspirators or victims of manipulation. General Mitchell's response to Derek's continued denial involved implementing formal accountability measures that reflected his military training in addressing personnel who demonstrated patterns of misconduct combined with resistance to corrective action. His approach prioritized protection of vulnerable family members over preservation of comfortable relationships. The first formal consequence involved Derek's immediate suspension from unsupervised access to Emma, with future contact contingent upon completion of anger management counseling and psychological evaluation by qualified professionals. This restriction was not presented as temporary punishment but as permanent protection measure until Derek demonstrated genuine behavioral change. Derek's access to Emma will be limited to supervised visits in controlled environments until he completes comprehensive psychological evaluation and anger management training. General Mitchell announced during a family meeting that included all adult family members, except Derek himself. The safety of a 3-year-old child takes precedence over adult family relationships and comfort levels. The formal nature of this restriction eliminated any ambiguity about expectations while establishing clear criteria for restoration of normal family interaction. My father's military background had provided frameworks for implementing accountability measures that were both decisive and fair, requiring specific performance rather than accepting promises of improved behavior. Derek's reaction to the formal restrictions revealed his growing awareness that his manipulation campaign had failed to achieve its objectives, and that his refusal to accept accountability was generating consequences that extended beyond temporary family discord to affect his fundamental relationships and social standing. The explosion of rage that accompanied Derek's discovery of the formal restrictions occurred during a phone call with my mother, during which his emotional volatility reached levels that required her to terminate the conversation for her own psychological safety. His response validated the family's concerns about his emotional regulation and the appropriateness of limiting his access to vulnerable individuals. "You people have lost your minds if you think you can dictate terms to me about my own family relationships," Derek shouted during the call that my mother later described as frightening in its intensity. "I will not be treated like a criminal by my own father, and I will not accept restrictions based on Sarah's hysterical overreaction to normal discipline." The continued characterization of his assault on Emma as normal discipline demonstrated Derek's persistent denial, while his threats regarding family relationships revealed the underlying aggression that had motivated his original violent behavior. His response confirmed that the protective measures were necessary and appropriate. Professional consequences began accumulating as Derek's behavioral problems affected his workplace performance and relationships with colleagues, who became aware of his family situation through his own inappropriate sharing of personal conflicts during business interactions. His inability to maintain professional boundaries reflected the same lack of judgment that had led to his assault on Emma. Derek's supervisor at the pharmaceutical company received multiple complaints from clients who found his aggressive sales tactics and emotional volatility concerning during business meetings. His professional reputation, which had previously provided stability and income security, began deteriorating as his personal problems affected his ability to maintain appropriate workplace behavior. Derek's recent behavior has become unprofessional and concerning to both colleagues and clients. His supervisor explained during a meeting that resulted in Derek being placed on administrative leave pending completion of an employee assistance program evaluation. His emotional outbursts and inappropriate discussion of personal conflicts during business meetings violate company standards for professional conduct. The workplace consequences represented independent validation of family concerns about Derek's behavioral problems, while demonstrating that his inability to regulate emotions extended beyond family relationships to affect all areas of his functioning. The professional accountability measures paralleled the family restrictions in requiring specific corrective action rather than accepting promises of improvement. Derek's response to professional consequences involved the same denial and blame shifting that had characterized his reaction to family accountability, with the addition of threats regarding legal action against family members whom he held responsible for damaging his reputation through their refusal to support his innocence narrative. "Sarah and Dad have destroyed my career by spreading lies about what happened with Emma," Derek claimed during conversations with former colleagues who had maintained contact despite his deteriorating professional standing. "I am considering legal action against them for defamation and interference with my employment relationships." The threat of legal action revealed Derek's desperation to maintain his victim narrative while demonstrating his continued misunderstanding of accountability and consequences. His inability to recognize that workplace problems resulted from his own behavior rather than family conspiracy illustrated the depth of his psychological denial. Legal consultation regarding Derek's threats revealed that his claims of defamation lacked merit, because family members had shared only factual information about witnessed events, rather than engaging in false characterization of his behavior. The attorney's assessment provided additional confirmation that Derek's narrative of persecution was inconsistent with legal and factual reality. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims. The family attorney explained during a consultation that General Mitchell had requested to ensure appropriate legal protection for family members. Derek cannot successfully claim defamation based on accurate reporting of his own witnessed behavior, regardless of the consequences that reporting has generated. The legal assessment eliminated any remaining family concern about potential liability, while reinforcing the appropriateness of holding Derek accountable for his actions. The consultation provided additional evidence that Derek's threats represented manipulation attempts rather than legitimate legal concerns. Social consequences began accumulating as Derek's former friends and community connections learned about his assault on Emma and his subsequent refusal to accept accountability for his behavior. His reputation within professional and social circles deteriorated as people who had previously respected him recognized the character issues that his actions had revealed. The pharmaceutical industry community in our region was relatively small, and news of Derek's workplace problems combined with family conflicts spread through professional networks in ways that affected his ability to maintain social relationships and potential future employment opportunities. His reputation became a liability rather than an asset. Derek's attempts to maintain social connections through continued denial and blame shifting proved counterproductive as friends and colleagues recognized the inconsistencies in his narrative and the inappropriateness of his refusal to accept responsibility for harming a child. His social isolation increased as people distanced themselves from someone whose behavior had become concerning. Derek's version of events doesn't make sense when you consider that his own father, who is a respected military leader, has implemented formal restrictions on his access to his granddaughter, observed Marcus Chen, a colleague who had previously maintained friendship with Derek despite growing concerns about his emotional volatility. The independent assessment from people who knew Derek professionally but were not involved in family dynamics provided objective validation of the appropriateness of accountability measures, while demonstrating that his behavior problems were visible to observers beyond immediate family members. Financial consequences emerged as Derek's separation from Jennifer, suspension from work, and potential legal fees created economic pressures that compounded his emotional stress, while eliminating resources that might have provided stability during the crisis. His refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing prevented access to support systems that required admission of problematic behavior. The Employee Assistance Program at Derek's workplace offered counseling and support services that could have addressed his behavioral problems while preserving his employment status. But accessing these resources required acknowledgement that personal issues were affecting his professional performance. His denial prevented utilization of available help. Derek's increasing financial pressure created additional stress that further compromised his emotional regulation while providing new justification for his victim narrative. His inability to connect financial consequences to his own behavioral choices demonstrated the circular nature of his denial system. Everyone is conspiring to destroy me financially because I refuse to apologize for something I didn't do wrong, Derek complained during a conversation with his estranged wife, who had agreed to meet with him to discuss practical separation arrangements. This family will not be satisfied until I am completely ruined. The continued characterization of consequences as conspiracy revealed Derek's persistent refusal to examine his own contribution to the crisis, while his focus on financial concerns rather than Emma's welfare demonstrated his fundamental misunderstanding of priorities that should govern family relationships. Physical health consequences began manifesting as Derek's emotional stress, social isolation, and financial pressure created a combination of factors that affected his overall well-being. His refusal to seek professional help for the psychological issues underlying his behavioral problems prevented access to resources that might have provided relief. Sleep disturbances, appetite changes, and other stress-related symptoms began affecting Derek's functioning, while further compromising his ability to maintain professional and social relationships. The deterioration in his physical condition provided additional evidence of the comprehensive nature of consequences he was experiencing. The mounting consequences across multiple life domains created a situation where Derek faced choices between continued denial that was generating escalating problems, or acceptance of accountability that might provide pathways for addressing the underlying issues. His response to this decision point would determine whether the crisis would continue escalating or begin moving toward resolution. The final confrontation that would permanently alter the trajectory of Derek's relationship with our family occurred 3 weeks after his initial assault on Emma, during what was supposed to be a supervised visit designed to assess his willingness to accept accountability and begin the process of behavioral change that General Mitchell had established as a prerequisite for restored family access. The supervised visit had been arranged through careful negotiation between my parents, with my mother advocating for providing Derek an opportunity to demonstrate genuine remorse and commitment to change, while my father insisted on strict protocols that would ensure Emma's safety while evaluating Derek's psychological state and readiness for accountability. The meeting was scheduled to take place at my parents' home under conditions that included my father's direct supervision, limited duration of 1 hour, and specific behavioral expectations that Derek had been informed of in advance. The parameters were designed to provide a controlled environment where Derek could demonstrate progress while maintaining appropriate protection for Emma. Derek's arrival at the scheduled time appeared to indicate compliance with the established conditions, but his demeanor and initial interactions revealed underlying anger and resentment that suggested his participation was motivated by tactical considerations, rather than genuine acceptance of the accountability requirements that had been established. I still think this whole supervised visit arrangement is completely unnecessary and insulting, Derek announced upon entering the house, immediately establishing a confrontational tone that violated the respectful behavior expectations that had been clearly communicated. "I am Emma's uncle, and treating me like a dangerous stranger is ridiculous." The opening statement revealed Derek's continued resistance to accepting that his behavior had created legitimate safety concerns that required protective measures. His characterization of appropriate safeguards as insults demonstrated his persistent inability to connect his actions to their natural consequences. General Mitchell's response to Derek's initial confrontational behavior reflected his military training in de-escalation techniques, combined with his determination to maintain the protective protocols that had been established to ensure Emma's well-being during the evaluation process. "Derek, the conditions for this visit were explained to you in advance, and your compliance with those conditions will determine whether future visits are possible," my father stated with the calm authority that had characterized his leadership throughout his distinguished career. "Your immediate challenge to established boundaries suggests that you have not yet developed the respect for limits that is necessary for unsupervised interaction with children." The clinical assessment embedded within my father's response served both as feedback about Derek's current behavior and as documentation of his continued resistance to accepting appropriate boundaries. The military approach to evaluation provided objective measures for determining progress or lack thereof. Emma's initial reaction to Derek's presence revealed the lasting psychological impact that his violent behavior had created, as she immediately moved closer to me and displayed signs of anxiety that had not been present during previous family gatherings before the assault incident. Her instinctive protective response provided additional evidence of the trauma his actions had caused. The visible fear that Emma demonstrated upon seeing Derek eliminated any remaining question about whether his behavior had caused lasting harm that extended beyond temporary physical discomfort. Her psychological response validated the family's concerns and reinforced the appropriateness of implementing protective measures. Derek's reaction to Emma's obvious discomfort revealed his continued inability to empathize with the consequences his behavior had created for his victim. Rather than expressing concern about her distress or attempting to reassure her through gentle interaction, he interpreted her fear as evidence of manipulation by other family members. "Sarah has obviously poisoned Emma against me by telling her that I am dangerous," Derek complained, demonstrating his refusal to acknowledge that children naturally fear adults who have hurt them. "This whole situation has been manufactured to make me look bad, and now you are using a 3-year-old's programmed response as evidence against me." The accusation that Emma's fear had been artificially created revealed Derek's complete disconnection from reality regarding cause-and-effect relationships. His inability to recognize that children remember traumatic experiences and respond accordingly demonstrated fundamental deficits in his understanding of child psychology and trauma responses. My response to Derek's accusation prioritized Emma's emotional needs while establishing clear boundaries around acceptable interaction during the supervised visit. The protective measures that General Mitchell had implemented required immediate enforcement when Derek's behavior created additional stress for his previous victim. "Derek, Emma's reaction is a natural response to remembering what you did to her," I stated clearly, maintaining the calm professionalism that my military training had developed while ensuring that Emma understood she was safe. "Your inability to recognize that your actions caused her fear demonstrates exactly why supervised visits are necessary." The direct connection between Derek's behavior and Emma's distress served both as education about trauma responses and as documentation of his continued failure to accept accountability for the psychological damage his violence had inflicted on a vulnerable child. General Mitchell's observation of Derek's interactions during the first 30 minutes of the supervised visit provided sufficient evidence to conclude that Derek had not made the psychological progress necessary for restoration of normal family relationships. His behavior demonstrated continued resistance to accountability rather than genuine commitment to change. The critical moment that transformed the supervised visit into the final termination of Derek's family access occurred when Emma accidentally knocked over a glass of water while playing, creating exactly the type of minor incident that had triggered Derek's original violent response 3 weeks earlier. Derek's immediate reaction to the spilled water revealed that the underlying anger and impulse control problems that had motivated his assault on Emma remained completely unaddressed despite the consequences he had experienced. His response demonstrated that supervision was insufficient protection when his psychological state remained fundamentally unchanged. "Emma, you need to be more careful and stop making messes that other people have to clean up," Derek said, his voice carrying the same harsh edge that had preceded his violent behavior during the original incident. His tone and posture suggested preparation for another physical intervention that would require immediate prevention. General Mitchell's assessment of Derek's response was instantaneous and decisive, reflecting his military training and threat evaluation, and his determination to prevent any repetition of violent behavior directed toward Emma. His intervention was swift and comprehensive. "Derek, your reaction to a minor accident demonstrates that you have not addressed the anger control issues that led to your assault on Emma," my father stated while positioning himself between Derek and Emma. "This visit is terminated immediately, and your access to this family is suspended indefinitely pending comprehensive psychological evaluation and treatment." The finality of this pronouncement reflected General Mitchell's recognition that Derek's continued presence posed ongoing risks that could not be managed through supervision alone. His military experience had taught him to make difficult decisions based on evidence rather than hope for improvement that was not supported by observable behavioral change. Derek's response to the termination of his family access involved an explosion of rage that validated every concern about his emotional volatility and confirmed the appropriateness of the protective measures that had been implemented. His reaction demonstrated the underlying aggression that had motivated his original violence toward Emma. "You have all lost your minds if you think you can treat me like this," Derek shouted, his voice reaching levels that required my father to escort him from the premises for everyone's safety. "I will not accept being banned from my own family because of lies and manipulation by people who want to destroy my reputation." The characterization of accountability as destruction revealed Derek's complete inability to distinguish between consequences for harmful behavior and persecution by family members motivated by malice. His victim mentality had become so entrenched that he could not recognize opportunities for redemption through authentic behavior change. The physical escort from the premises that General Mitchell was required to perform demonstrated the complete breakdown of Derek's emotional regulation and his potential for escalating violence when confronted with boundaries that he refused to accept. His behavior confirmed that family safety required his complete removal rather than continued attempts at managed interaction. Emma's reaction to Derek's violent outburst provided heartbreaking confirmation of the trauma his original assault had created and the ongoing psychological damage that his continued presence in her life would have caused. Her terrified response to his rage validated every protective measure that had been implemented. The police report that General Mitchell filed following Derek's removal from the premises documented the escalating pattern of threatening behavior and established formal legal protection for family members who had become targets of Derek's displaced anger about the consequences his own actions had generated. Derek Mitchell's behavior during a supervised family visit escalated to threatening conduct that required physical removal from the premises. The police report stated with the factual precision that would provide legal foundation for future protective measures. His continued resistance to accountability for previous violent behavior toward a minor child indicates ongoing risk that requires formal intervention. The legal documentation served both as protection for family members and as evidence that Derek's behavioral problems had progressed beyond family conflict management to require institutional intervention. The formal record would prove crucial for establishing patterns of escalating aggression. Derek's response to police involvement revealed his complete disconnection from reality regarding the seriousness of his behavior and the appropriateness of legal consequences for threatening conduct directed toward family members who were protecting a vulnerable child from his continued aggression. The police report is just another example of this family's determination to destroy me through false accusations. Derek claimed during subsequent phone calls to extended family members who had maintained contact despite his deteriorating behavior They are using legal manipulation to prevent me from defending myself against lies about what really happened. The continued characterization of accountability as persecution demonstrated Derek's psychological inability to process the relationship between his choices and their consequences. His narrative required portraying himself as the victim of elaborate conspiracy, rather than accepting responsibility for behavior that had generated natural protective responses. Jennifer's decision to file for divorce during this period eliminated any remaining possibility for Derek to maintain stability through his marriage while avoiding accountability for his family behavior. Her professional assessment as a clinical social worker had convinced her that Derek's psychological issues posed ongoing risks that she could not continue to manage. Derek's escalating anger and his complete refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing represent patterns that are likely to continue and potentially worsen without intensive professional intervention. Jennifer explained in her divorce filing, which included documentation of Derek's threatening behavior and professional assessment of risk factors. The clinical evaluation from Derek's own wife provided independent professional validation of family concerns while eliminating his final source of emotional and financial support. His isolation became complete as every relationship was damaged by his refusal to accept accountability for harmful behavior. The point of no return had been reached through Derek's own choices rather than arbitrary family punishment. His systematic rejection of every opportunity for accountability and redemption had created consequences that could not be reversed through renewed manipulation campaigns or promises of future behavioral change. The comprehensive nature of Derek's isolation reflected the natural result of choosing victim mentality over personal responsibility when confronted with clear evidence of harmful behavior. His commitment to maintaining innocence had required sacrificing every important relationship and opportunity for support. The recognition that Derek had passed beyond the possibility of redemption through family intervention marked a turning point in our understanding of accountability and the limits of loyalty when family members engage in behavior that threatens the safety of vulnerable individuals. The protection of Emma had become the paramount consideration that superseded all other family priorities, including the preservation of relationships with adults who refused to accept responsibility for their harmful actions. The courage to prioritize child safety over family harmony had created permanent transformation in our family dynamics. The weeks following Derek's permanent removal from family access created a period of profound reflection for every member of the Mitchell family, as we grappled with the reality that our traditional approaches to managing conflict had proven inadequate when confronted with behavior that threatened the safety of vulnerable individuals. The recognition that we had collectively enabled Derek's escalating aggression through years of diplomatic accommodation marked the beginning of a fundamental reassessment of our values and priorities. The silence that settled over our family gatherings revealed how much energy had been devoted to managing Derek's emotional volatility and accommodating his resistance to accountability. Without the constant tension of navigating his unpredictable reactions and defensive narratives, conversations became more authentic and focused on genuine connection rather than careful avoidance of triggering his aggressive responses. My mother's psychological adjustment to Derek's absence proved particularly challenging, as she confronted the reality that her diplomatic approach to family conflict management had inadvertently protected someone whose behavior posed ongoing risks to her granddaughter's safety and emotional well-being. The recognition that maintaining harmony had taken precedence over protecting the innocent created profound guilt that required professional counseling to address. I spent so many years trying to keep peace between Derek and the rest of the family that I failed to recognize how my intervention was enabling his behavior to escalate. Catherine Mitchell confided during a therapy session that she had reluctantly agreed to attend after General Mitchell expressed concern about her emotional state. My attempts to minimize conflict actually made it possible for him to avoid accountability until his behavior became dangerous. The therapeutic process provided my mother with frameworks for understanding how family systems can inadvertently enable harmful behavior through well-intentioned efforts to maintain stability. Her recognition that diplomatic solutions were inappropriate for addressing violence represented a fundamental shift in her approach to family leadership and conflict resolution. General Mitchell's own process of reflection focused on his decision to defer to my mother's preferences for avoiding confrontation, rather than implementing the direct accountability measures that his military training had taught him were necessary when personnel demonstrated patterns of misconduct. His professional experience had provided clear guidelines for addressing problematic behavior, but family dynamics had complicated his application of those principles. I allowed family loyalty to override my professional judgment about the seriousness of Derek's behavioral problems, my father acknowledged during private conversations, where he examined his own contribution to enabling Derek's escalating aggression. My military training taught me to address misconduct immediately and decisively, but I permitted civilian family dynamics to delay appropriate intervention until a child was harmed. The recognition that his professional expertise in personnel management should have been applied to family situations represented a significant evolution in my father's understanding of leadership responsibilities that transcended organizational boundaries. His commitment to applying military standards of accountability to family relationships would prove crucial for preventing future incidents. My sister Amanda's reflection process involved examining her own observations of Derek's increasing emotional volatility during previous family gatherings, and her failure to advocate for protective measures when she witnessed concerning interactions between Derek and the children in our extended family. Her position as someone who had maintained neutral relationships with all siblings created unique perspective on the gradual escalation that had preceded the crisis. I noticed that Derek's reactions to children's normal behavior were becoming increasingly harsh over the past year, but I convinced myself that his stress from work and marriage problems explained his impatience. Amanda explained during family discussions about lessons learned from the crisis. I should have spoken up about my concerns instead of hoping that his circumstances would improve and his behavior would return to normal. The recognition that early intervention might have prevented Derek's assault on Emma created additional motivation for establishing new family protocols that prioritized child safety over adult comfort when behavioral concerns were identified. Amanda's commitment to advocacy rather than silent observation represented important progress in family accountability culture. Jennifer's perspective as Derek's estranged wife provided crucial insight into the private behavioral patterns that had preceded his public violence against Emma. Her professional training as a clinical social worker had enabled her to recognize warning signs that family members without mental health expertise had missed or minimized, but her position within the marriage had complicated her ability to advocate for intervention. Derek's inability to regulate his emotions had been escalating for months before the incident with Emma, but his charm and manipulation skills masked the severity of his psychological problems from people who only saw him during controlled social interactions. Jennifer shared during a meeting with General Mitchell, where she provided background information that helped explain the sudden emergence of violent behavior that had seemed uncharacteristic to other family members. The clinical assessment from someone with intimate knowledge of Derek's private behavior validated the family's decision to implement permanent protective measures while providing education about psychological patterns that enabled family members to better understand the crisis that had unfolded. Jennifer's professional perspective eliminated any remaining doubt about the appropriateness of the accountability measures that had been established. Emma's recovery process provided both inspiration and sobering evidence of the lasting impact that Derek's violence had created in the life of an innocent child, whose only transgression had been normal toddler behavior that conflicted with an adult's unrealistic expectations for compliance and emotional regulation. The trauma counseling that Emma received through specialized pediatric therapy services revealed the sophisticated understanding that young children possess regarding safety and threat assessment. Her ability to articulate her fear of Derek and her relief at his absence demonstrated that children recognize when adults pose dangers to their well-being, even when those adults are family members who should provide protection rather than harm. Emma has explained that she feels scared when Uncle Derek gets angry because his voice becomes mean and his hands hurt people. The pediatric trauma specialist reported during consultation sessions that provided guidance for supporting Emma's emotional recovery. Her description of the incident demonstrates clear understanding that Derek's behavior was inappropriate and frightening, which validates the protective measures that have been implemented. The professional validation of Emma's perspective eliminated any remaining question about whether the family's response to Derek's behavior had been proportionate to the actual threat he posed. Her recovery progress provided evidence that children thrive when protected from adults whose emotional volatility creates unpredictable and dangerous environments. The legal proceedings that accompanied Derek's complete estrangement from family relationships revealed the criminal nature of his behavior and the appropriateness of formal legal consequences for adults who assault children. The restraining order that General Mitchell obtained provided official recognition that Derek's threatening behavior posed ongoing risks that required institutional protection rather than family management. The evidence presented regarding Derek Mitchell's assault on a 3-year-old child and his subsequent threatening behavior toward family members who reported the incident demonstrates clear grounds for legal protection. The family court judge stated during proceedings that established formal barriers to Derek's contact with Emma and other vulnerable family members. The respondent's refusal to accept accountability for his actions indicates ongoing risk that justifies comprehensive protective measures. The legal validation of family concerns provided additional confirmation that the protective measures implemented by General Mitchell were not only appropriate but legally necessary given the evidence of Derek's behavioral patterns and his resistance to accountability. The formal court proceedings created permanent documentation of the crisis and its resolution. Derek's complete isolation from family support systems represented the natural consequence of his systematic refusal to accept responsibility for behavior that had harmed an innocent child. His commitment to maintaining victim status rather than pursuing redemption through authentic behavioral change had eliminated every opportunity for relationship restoration and community reintegration. The reports from former colleagues and social connections indicated that Derek's isolation extended beyond family relationships to encompass professional and social networks that had become aware of his assault on Emma and his subsequent refusal to accept accountability. His reputation had become a liability that prevented meaningful employment and social interaction within communities that valued child safety. Derek's behavior during the family crisis revealed character issues that made continued association professionally and personally uncomfortable, observed Marcus Chen, who had previously maintained friendship with Derek despite growing concerns about his emotional stability. His inability to acknowledge wrongdoing when confronted with clear evidence of harmful behavior raised questions about his judgment and reliability in all areas of functioning. The independent assessment from people who had known Derek in various contexts provided objective validation that his behavioral problems were visible to observers beyond immediate family members, and that his isolation was the result of his own choices, rather than coordinated persecution by family members seeking to destroy his reputation. The financial and legal consequences that Derek faced as a result of his behavioral choices created additional pressure that compounded his psychological distress, while eliminating resources that might have provided stability during a period when therapeutic intervention could have offered possibilities for redemption and relationship restoration. The employee assistance programs and therapeutic services that had been available through Derek's workplace and insurance coverage required acknowledgement of problematic behavior as a prerequisite for accessing support. His continued denial prevented utilization of resources that could have addressed the underlying psychological issues that had motivated his violence against Emma. The recognition that Derek had chosen isolation and continued psychological deterioration over accountability and potential redemption marked a turning point in family understanding of the limits of loyalty and the requirements of authentic love. The decision to prioritize Emma's safety over Derek's comfort represented a fundamental shift in family values that would influence all future relationships and interactions. The courage required to maintain protective boundaries despite Derek's manipulation attempts and the social pressure to forgive family members regardless of their behavior demonstrated the strength that emerges when individuals prioritize principle over convenience. The family's commitment to child protection had required sacrificing comfortable relationships in favor of moral clarity. The period of reflection that followed Derek's removal from family life created opportunities for examining the systemic patterns that had enabled his escalating behavior, while establishing new protocols that would prevent similar situations from developing in the future. The lessons learned from the crisis would transform family culture in ways that strengthened protection for vulnerable members. The recognition that rock bottom had been reached through Derek's own choices rather than external persecution provided the foundation for authentic healing and growth among family members who had been affected by his behavior. The elimination of his disruptive presence created space for genuine relationship development that had been impossible while managing his emotional volatility. The understanding that true family loyalty required protecting the innocent rather than enabling harmful behavior established new standards for accountability that would govern future relationships and interactions. The courage to confront uncomfortable truths about family dynamics had created opportunities for authentic growth and improved safety for vulnerable individuals. The transformation that emerged from reaching rock bottom would prove more valuable than the comfortable but dysfunctional relationships that had preceded the crisis. The family's commitment to principles over personalities had created the foundation for healthier dynamics that prioritized protection and accountability over harmony and accommodation. The transformative realization that would reshape my understanding of family relationships, personal responsibility, and the true meaning of protection arrived during a quiet evening, 6 weeks after Derek's permanent removal from our lives. I was reviewing the detailed documentation that General Mitchell had maintained throughout the crisis when I discovered patterns that revealed how our family's dysfunction had been masked by surface-level harmony for years before Derek's assault on Emma forced us to confront uncomfortable truths. The documentation included not only recent events but historical patterns of behavior that my father had observed during previous family gatherings. His military training and personnel evaluation had led him to maintain informal records of concerning interactions, but his deference to my mother's diplomatic approach had prevented him from acting on those observations until a child was physically harmed. The written record revealed incidents spanning 3 years where Derek had demonstrated inappropriate responses to children's normal behavior, escalating levels of verbal aggression during family discussions, and increasingly frequent episodes of emotional volatility that family members had accommodated through careful avoidance strategies rather than direct intervention. December 2021. Derek's harsh correction of Emma's cousin during holiday gathering was disproportionate to the child's behavior. January 2022. Derek's aggressive response to questioning about his work situation created tension that required diplomatic intervention to diffuse. March 2022. Derek's inappropriate criticism of parenting approaches used by other family members demonstrated concerning lack of boundaries. My father's notes documented with military precision. The pattern that emerged from this historical documentation revealed that Derek's assault on Emma had not been an isolated incident triggered by temporary stress, but rather the culmination of escalating behavioral problems that our family's conflict avoidance culture had enabled through systematic accommodation rather than appropriate accountability. This recognition created a profound shift in my understanding of what had actually occurred during the crisis. Rather than being victims of Derek's sudden behavioral deterioration, we had been participants in a family system that prioritized comfort over safety and harmony over justice. Our commitment to maintaining pleasant relationships had inadvertently created conditions that enabled harmful behavior to escalate until it threatened the most vulnerable member of our family. The awakening involved recognizing that my own professional training as a Coast Guard officer had provided clear frameworks for addressing misconduct and protecting vulnerable individuals, but I had failed to apply those principles within family relationships because I had accepted different standards for civilian versus military accountability. The realization that leadership principles should transcend organizational boundaries represented a fundamental evolution in my understanding of personal responsibility. My military experience had taught me that early intervention prevents escalation of problematic behavior, that clear consequences must follow violations of established standards, and that protecting those who cannot protect themselves takes precedence over maintaining comfortable relationships with those who pose risks. These principles had guided my professional conduct, but had been abandoned when dealing with family dynamics that seemed to require different approaches. The contrast between my willingness to hold subordinates accountable for minor infractions while accepting Derek's increasingly serious violations of basic human decency revealed the cognitive dissonance that had prevented effective family leadership during the years leading up to the crisis. The recognition that I had applied lower standards to family relationships than to professional obligations created profound motivation for implementing comprehensive changes in my approach to personal accountability. The therapeutic work that Emma's trauma counselor had recommended for our entire family provided additional frameworks for understanding how family systems can become dysfunctional through well-intentioned efforts to avoid conflict. The education we received about enabling behaviors, boundary setting, and appropriate responses to aggressive conduct created new vocabulary for discussing issues that had been obscured by diplomatic language, designed to minimize rather than address concerning patterns. Dr. Sarah Chen, the family therapist who specialized in addressing family trauma and dysfunction, explained how our response to Derek's behavior had followed predictable patterns that enable escalation rather than promoting accountability. Her professional assessment provided objective perspective on dynamics that had seemed normal when viewed from within the family system, but appeared clearly problematic when evaluated against healthy relationship standards. The Mitchell family developed sophisticated strategies for managing Derek's emotional volatility that inadvertently reinforced his belief that aggressive behavior was acceptable as long as it could be justified through claims of stress or external pressures. Dr. Chen observed during sessions that helped us understand how accommodation had become enablement. The family's investment in maintaining surface-level harmony prevented the direct confrontation that might have motivated Derek to seek help for his underlying psychological issues. The clinical perspective on our family dynamics provided validation for the protective measures that General Mitchell had implemented while offering guidance for preventing similar situations in the future. The therapeutic education helped distinguish between healthy conflict resolution and dysfunctional accommodation of harmful behavior. The realization that Emma's safety had been compromised for years before Derek's physical assault occurred created additional motivation for implementing comprehensive changes in family protocols. The recognition that children are often the first victims of family dysfunction because they cannot advocate for themselves or leave harmful situations established child protection as the paramount consideration that would guide all future family decisions. Emma's perspective on family dynamics, as interpreted through her trauma counselor, revealed that children are sophisticated observers of adult behavior, and that they recognize when family systems prioritize adult comfort over child safety. Her ability to articulate her relief at Derek's absence demonstrated that children understand the difference between adults who provide genuine security and those who create unpredictable environments that require constant vigilance. Emma has explained that family gatherings feel peaceful now because she does not have to worry about Uncle Derek getting angry when children make normal kid mistakes. Dr. Chen reported during consultation sessions that provided insight into the child's experience of family transformation. Her description indicates that Derek's presence had created chronic, low-level anxiety that she experienced during all family interactions, even when he was not directly engaging with her. The revelation that Emma had been experiencing ongoing stress during family gatherings long before Derek's physical assault provided sobering evidence of how children absorb family dysfunction and adapt their behavior to manage adult emotional volatility. The recognition that our accommodation of Derek's aggression had required a 3-year-old to develop anxiety management strategies created profound motivation for ensuring that child welfare would never again be subordinated to adult relationship considerations. The awakening extended to understanding how Derek's violence had been enabled not only through our accommodation of his behavior, but through our failure to recognize the warning signs that his marriage was deteriorating due to similar patterns of aggression and control. Jennifer's professional assessment of his psychological problems should have been taken seriously rather than dismissed as marital conflict that would resolve through couple counseling. The revelation that Jennifer had attempted to warn family members about Derek's escalating emotional volatility during informal conversations, but had been discouraged from pursuing formal intervention, demonstrated how family loyalty can become complicity when it prevents appropriate protection of vulnerable individuals. Her professional expertise had been dismissed because acknowledging her concerns would have required confronting uncomfortable truths about Derek's character. Jennifer's attempts to discuss Derek's behavioral problems were consistently redirected toward strategies for managing his stress, rather than addressing the underlying psychological issues that were creating risks for everyone around him. Dr. Chen explained during sessions that examined how family communication patterns had prevented effective intervention. The family's investment in Derek's reputation as someone who was fundamentally good but temporarily struggling prevented recognition of warning signs that his problems were severe and potentially dangerous. The understanding that Jennifer's professional training had provided accurate assessment of Derek's psychological state, while family loyalty had created resistance to accepting her evaluation, represented another dimension of the awakening about how personal relationships can compromise objective judgment when uncomfortable truths need to be acknowledged. The financial and professional consequences that Derek had experienced as a result of his behavioral choices provided additional evidence that family concerns about his conduct were shared by objective observers who had no investment in maintaining family harmony. His workplace suspension and social isolation validated the family's protective measures, while demonstrating that his problems extended beyond family relationships to affect all areas of his functioning. The recognition that Derek's behavioral problems had become apparent to colleagues, friends, and professional acquaintances eliminated any remaining possibility that family intervention had been motivated by personal vendetta rather than legitimate concerns about safety and accountability. The independent validation from multiple sources confirmed that the crisis had revealed authentic character defects rather than temporary stress responses. General Mitchell's reflection on his own leadership during the crisis provided crucial insights into how military principles could be applied more effectively to family relationships. His recognition that early intervention using direct accountability measures might have prevented Derek's escalation to physical violence created motivation for implementing comprehensive changes in family governance that prioritized protection over diplomacy. My military training taught me that clear standards and immediate consequences prevent escalation of problematic behavior, but I allowed civilian family dynamics to override those principles until a child was harmed. My father acknowledged during family discussions about lessons learned from the crisis. The courage to implement unpopular but necessary accountability measures should not be limited to professional relationships when family members engage in harmful conduct. The commitment to applying military standards of accountability to family relationships represented a fundamental shift in General Mitchell's approach to family leadership. His recognition that protecting vulnerable family members required the same decisiveness that had characterized his professional leadership created new frameworks for preventing future incidents. The awakening involved understanding that authentic family loyalty required protecting the innocent rather than enabling harmful behavior for the sake of maintaining comfortable relationships. The courage to prioritize child safety over adult comfort represented a transformation in values that would influence all future family interactions and decisions. The recognition that true love sometimes requires establishing firm boundaries with family members who engage in harmful behavior created new understanding of what genuine care actually means in practice. The willingness to accept relationship disruption rather than compromise child safety demonstrated the difference between enabling disguised as love and authentic protection that prioritizes welfare over convenience. My own professional development as a Coast Guard officer provided additional perspective on the leadership principles that should govern family relationships. The recognition that courage, accountability, and protection of vulnerable individuals were as important in civilian contexts as in military situations created motivation for applying professional standards to personal relationships. The awakening established new frameworks for evaluating family dynamics that prioritize safety over harmony and accountability over accommodation. The recognition that healthy relationships required honest communication about concerning behavior rather than diplomatic avoidance of uncomfortable topics created commitment to implementing comprehensive changes in family culture. The transformation that emerged from this awakening would prove more valuable than the comfortable but dysfunctional relationships that had preceded the crisis. The family's commitment to principles over personalities had created opportunities for authentic growth and improved protection for vulnerable members that would benefit future generations of Mitchell family members. The implementation of new family protocols began with careful, deliberate actions designed to establish healthy boundaries and accountability measures that would prevent future incidents while supporting the emotional recovery of all family members who had been affected by Derek's behavioral crisis. The transition from recognition to action required courage to abandon familiar patterns that had provided surface-level stability while enabling harmful conduct to escalate unchecked. General Mitchell assumed primary responsibility for developing comprehensive family governance procedures that applied military principles of accountability and protection to civilian relationships. His approach involved creating clear standards for acceptable behavior, establishing consequences for violations of those standards, and implementing early intervention protocols that would address concerning patterns before they could escalate to dangerous levels. The first formal policy established mandatory reporting requirements for any family member who observed aggressive behavior, inappropriate interactions with children, or threatening conduct during family gatherings. The protocol eliminated the diplomatic discretion that had previously allowed concerning incidents to be managed through informal accommodation rather than documented accountability measures. Any family member who witnesses behavior that creates safety concerns for vulnerable individuals has an obligation to report those observations to family leadership for formal evaluation and appropriate response. General Mitchell announced during the first family meeting conducted under the new governance structure, "The protection of children and other vulnerable family members takes precedence over adult comfort levels and relationship preservation preferences." The mandatory reporting requirement represented a fundamental shift from the previous culture of diplomatic accommodation to a system that prioritized transparency and early intervention. The policy eliminated the informal conspiracy of silence that had enabled Derek's escalating aggression to continue without appropriate consequences until a child was physically harmed. My mother's adjustment to the new family governance structure required significant psychological adaptation as she learned to replace her instinctive diplomatic responses with direct accountability measures when concerning behavior was observed. Her natural inclination toward conflict avoidance had to be systematically overcome through therapeutic support and conscious commitment to child protection principles. The family therapy sessions that Dr. Chen conducted provided Catherine Mitchell with practical tools for recognizing concerning behavior patterns and implementing appropriate responses that prioritize safety over harmony. The therapeutic education helped her understand how well-intentioned accommodation could inadvertently enable harmful conduct to escalate beyond manageable levels. Mrs. Mitchell's commitment to maintaining family harmony through diplomatic intervention represents admirable values, but those approaches must be balanced with recognition that some behaviors require direct accountability rather than management through accommodation. Dr. Chen explained during sessions that helped establish new communication protocols. The courage to implement unpopular but necessary consequences demonstrates authentic care for family welfare. The development of new communication standards required every family member to learn vocabulary and frameworks for discussing concerning behavior directly, rather than using diplomatic language that minimized the seriousness of problematic conduct. The therapeutic education provided tools for honest evaluation of family dynamics, without the defensive mechanisms that had previously obscured dangerous patterns. Emma's continued progress through specialized trauma counseling provided both motivation for maintaining the protective measures and evidence that children thrive when family systems prioritize their safety over adult relationship considerations. Her recovery demonstrated the resilience that emerges when vulnerable individuals receive appropriate protection and support. The pediatric trauma specialist reported significant improvement in Emma's anxiety levels and overall emotional stability as she adapted to family gatherings that no longer required constant vigilance about adult emotional volatility. Her ability to engage in normal childhood behavior without fear of triggering aggressive responses validated the importance of the protective measures that had been implemented. Emma's psychological recovery has been remarkable since the removal of the threatening family member and the implementation of clear safety protocols. Dr. Martinez observed during consultation sessions that tracked her progress. Her increased confidence and reduced anxiety demonstrate that children recognize when family systems have been restructured to prioritize their protection and emotional well-being. The documentation of Emma's recovery progress provided additional evidence that the family's transformation was producing measurable benefits for the individuals who had been most affected by the previous dysfunction. Her improved emotional state reinforced the family's commitment to maintaining the accountability measures despite their disruption of comfortable relationship patterns. The establishment of supervised interaction protocols for future family gatherings created structured environments where concerning behavior could be identified and addressed immediately rather than being accommodated through informal management strategies. The protocols required designated observers, who possessed training in recognizing warning signs of escalating aggression or inappropriate conduct. Amanda volunteered to receive formal training in conflict de-escalation and behavioral observation techniques that would enable her to serve as a designated safety monitor during family gatherings. Her commitment to developing professional-level skills for protecting family members demonstrated the seriousness with which the new accountability measures were being implemented. The training program that Amanda completed through a certified domestic violence prevention organization provided her with frameworks for recognizing early warning signs of aggressive behavior, techniques for intervening safely when concerning conduct was observed, and protocols for documenting incidents that required follow-up accountability measures. The family's commitment to professional-level training for safety monitoring demonstrates recognition that protecting vulnerable individuals requires expertise and systematic approaches rather than informal good intentions. The domestic violence prevention specialist explained during Amanda's certification process. The willingness to invest in formal education about family safety protocols indicates serious commitment to preventing future incidents. Amanda's certification as a family safety monitor represented tangible evidence of the transformation in family culture, from informal accommodation of problematic behavior to professional-level accountability measures designed to protect vulnerable members. Her expertise would prove crucial for maintaining safe environments during gatherings that included children or other individuals who might be targets of aggressive conduct. The development of emergency response procedures ensured that appropriate intervention would be available immediately if concerning behavior was observed during family interactions. The protocols included clear authority structures, communication procedures, and escalation pathways that would enable rapid response to potential threats, without requiring prolonged deliberation or consensus building. General Mitchell's military experience in emergency response planning provided frameworks for developing comprehensive protocols that could be implemented quickly when situations required immediate intervention. The procedures eliminated the confusion and delay that had characterized the family's initial response to Derek's assault on Emma. Emergency response protocols must be established in advance and practiced regularly to ensure effective implementation when crisis situations arise. General Mitchell explained during family training sessions where emergency procedures were reviewed and rehearsed. The protection of vulnerable family members requires the same level of preparation and coordination that military operations demand for successful execution. Quote, "The emergency response training that every adult family member completed provided practical skills for managing crisis situations, while maintaining appropriate documentation for follow-up accountability measures. The preparation ensured that future incidents would be met with professional-level response rather than improvised reaction. The establishment of external accountability partnerships with professional organizations created additional oversight mechanisms that would provide objective evaluation of family dynamics and early identification of concerning patterns that might not be apparent to family members who were emotionally invested in maintaining positive relationships. Dr. Chen's agreement to serve as an ongoing family consultant provided access to professional expertise for evaluating complex situations and determining appropriate responses when behavior concerns arose. Her external perspective would help prevent the emotional investment and relationship considerations that had previously compromised objective assessment of problematic conduct. The quarterly family assessment sessions that Dr. Chen would conduct created systematic opportunities for reviewing family dynamics, identifying areas for improvement, and adjusting protocols based on changing circumstances or emerging challenges. The professional oversight would ensure that the family's commitment to accountability remained strong, even as the immediate crisis receded from active memory. Regular professional evaluation of family dynamics provides objective assessment that helps prevent gradual erosion of accountability standards over time, Dr. Chen explained during the establishment of ongoing consultation arrangements. The commitment to external oversight demonstrates recognition that maintaining healthy family relationships requires systematic attention and professional support. The investment in professional consultation services represented significant financial commitment that demonstrated the family's recognition that preventing future crises justified substantial resource allocation. The ongoing expense would serve as additional motivation for maintaining the accountability measures that had required professional intervention to establish. The documentation standards that General Mitchell implemented created comprehensive record-keeping systems that would provide evidence for evaluation of long-term progress and identification of patterns that might require additional intervention. The military-level documentation ensured that important information would not be lost through informal communication or selective memory. The detailed incident reporting forms that were developed for documenting concerning behavior included specific categories for different types of problematic conduct, standardized assessment criteria for evaluating seriousness levels, and clear protocols for determining appropriate responses based on objective evaluation rather than subjective reaction. Comprehensive documentation provides the factual foundation necessary for making informed decisions about family safety and accountability measures. General Mitchell explained during training sessions, where family members learned to complete incident reports accurately and thoroughly. The quality of response depends on the quality of information available for evaluation. The commitment to professional-level documentation represented another dimension of the family's transformation from informal relationship management to systematic accountability procedures. The record-keeping requirements would ensure that future decisions about family safety would be based on documented evidence, rather than subjective impressions or emotional considerations. The gradual implementation of new family protocols created opportunities for testing the effectiveness of accountability measures, while building confidence in the family's ability to maintain safe environments for vulnerable members. The careful pacing of changes allowed family members to adapt to new expectations, while providing evidence that the transformation was producing positive results. The first family gathering, conducted under the new protocols, demonstrated the difference between surface-level harmony maintained through accommodation of problematic behavior and authentic peace that emerges when family systems prioritize safety and accountability. The absence of underlying tension created space for genuine connection and enjoyment that had been impossible while managing Derek's emotional volatility. The success of initial implementation provided motivation for expanding the accountability measures and continuing the therapeutic work that was supporting the family's transformation. The evidence that change was possible and beneficial reinforced the commitment to maintaining the difficult but necessary work of establishing healthy family dynamics that protected vulnerable members while supporting authentic relationships among individuals who demonstrated respect for appropriate boundaries and accountability standards. The success of the initial accountability protocols generated expanding confidence within the Mitchell family regarding their capacity to maintain safe environments while fostering authentic relationships based on mutual respect and appropriate boundaries. The positive outcomes from the first month of implementation created momentum for developing additional safety measures and establishing the family as a model for other military families struggling with similar accountability challenges. General Mitchell's recognition that their family transformation might benefit other families dealing with similar crises led to his decision to document their protocols for potential sharing with military family support networks. His assessment that the principles underlying their recovery could be systematized and replicated reflected his understanding that family dysfunction was a widespread problem, requiring institutional rather than purely individual solutions. The formal documentation project that General Mitchell initiated involved collaboration with Dr. Chen to develop comprehensive guidelines that could be adapted by other families facing accountability challenges involving family members whose behavior threatened vulnerable individuals. The systematic approach to documenting their transformation process reflected the military emphasis on creating replicable procedures for addressing complex operational challenges. The Mitchell family's successful implementation of accountability protocols demonstrates that military leadership principles can be effectively applied to civilian family relationships when adapted appropriately for domestic contexts. Dr. Chen observed during consultation sessions focused on developing transferable frameworks. Their commitment to systematic intervention rather than informal accommodation provides a model that could benefit many families struggling with similar dynamics. The collaboration between military leadership expertise and clinical psychology created innovative approaches to family governance that combined the decisiveness necessary for protecting vulnerable individuals with the therapeutic understanding required for supporting long-term behavioral change and relationship healing. The interdisciplinary approach produced more comprehensive solutions than either perspective could have achieved independently. Amanda's development as a certified family safety monitor progressed beyond initial training to include specialized education in child protection protocols and domestic violence intervention techniques. Her commitment to professional-level expertise reflected the family's recognition that protecting vulnerable members required sophisticated skills rather than simple good intentions or informal vigilance. The advanced training that Amanda completed through partnerships with local law enforcement and social services agencies provided her with legal knowledge regarding mandatory reporting requirements, evidence preservation techniques, and coordination procedures with external authorities when family situations required institutional intervention. Her expertise positioned the family to respond appropriately to future challenges while maintaining compliance with legal obligations. Amanda Mitchell's completion of Advanced Family Safety Certification demonstrates exceptional commitment to protecting vulnerable family members through professional-level skills and knowledge, the training coordinator noted during her certification ceremony. Her expertise will enable early identification and appropriate response to concerning behavior patterns before they can escalate to dangerous levels. The formal recognition of Amanda's expertise by external professional organizations validated the family's investment in systematic accountability measures while creating opportunities for her to assist other families facing similar challenges. Her certified status positioned her as a resource for military family support networks, seeking guidance on implementing effective protection protocols. Emma's continued therapeutic progress provided ongoing motivation for maintaining the accountability measures, while demonstrating the resilience that children display when family systems prioritize their safety and emotional well-being. Her psychological recovery served as tangible evidence that the difficult decisions required for family transformation produced meaningful benefits for the individuals most affected by previous dysfunction. The pediatric trauma specialist reported that Emma's anxiety symptoms had completely resolved, and that her developmental progress had accelerated beyond normal expectations following the implementation of family safety protocols. Her improved emotional regulation and increased confidence during family interactions validated the effectiveness of the protective measures that had been established. Emma's remarkable recovery demonstrates the capacity for healing that emerges when children are provided with consistent safety and predictable family environments. Drive. Martinez explained during consultation sessions that tracked her ongoing progress. Her psychological resilience has flourished within family structures that prioritize her protection and emotional needs over adult relationship considerations. The documentation of Emma's recovery provided compelling evidence for the effectiveness of systematic accountability measures in supporting child welfare. Her progress reports became part of the formal case study that General Mitchell was developing for potential sharing with military family support networks facing similar challenges. The establishment of monthly family assessment meetings created structured opportunities for evaluating the effectiveness of implemented protocols, while identifying areas requiring adjustment or additional development. The systematic review process ensured that accountability measures remained current and responsive to changing family dynamics and emerging challenges. Dr. Chen's facilitation of these monthly assessments provided professional guidance for interpreting family dynamics and determining appropriate modifications to existing protocols. Her clinical expertise helped distinguish between normal adjustment challenges and concerning patterns that might require additional intervention or protocol refinement. Regular assessment of family dynamics enables continuous improvement of accountability measures while maintaining focus on the primary objective of protecting vulnerable family members. Dr. Chen explained during the establishment of ongoing evaluation procedures. The commitment to systematic review demonstrates recognition that effective family governance requires ongoing attention and professional support. The monthly assessment process created additional opportunities for family members to practice new communication skills and reinforce their commitment to the values that had emerged from their transformation experience. The structured discussions helped maintain momentum for continued growth while preventing gradual erosion of accountability standards. Jennifer's gradual reintegration into family activities as a divorced former family member provided opportunities for testing the effectiveness of new protocols, while demonstrating the family's commitment to supporting individuals who had been affected by Derek's behavior. Her presence at family gatherings served as validation for the protective measures, while offering her emotional support during her own recovery process. The family's decision to maintain relationships with Jennifer despite her divorce from Derek reflected their understanding that victims of harmful behavior deserved continued support rather than exclusion based on their previous association with problematic family members. Her inclusion demonstrated the distinction between accountability for harmful conduct and compassion for those who had been affected by that conduct. Jennifer's continued inclusion in family activities demonstrates the family's commitment to supporting individuals who were victimized by Derek's behavior, rather than requiring them to bear additional consequences for his misconduct. Dr. Chen observed during assessment sessions that evaluated the family's approach to managing complex relationship dynamics. Her positive experience within the transformed family structure provides additional validation for the effectiveness of implemented accountability measures. Jennifer's professional perspective as a clinical social worker continued to provide valuable insights for refining family protocols, while her personal experience offered understanding of the challenges involved in recovering from exposure to emotionally volatile and potentially dangerous family members. Her dual perspective enhanced the family's capacity for supporting other individuals facing similar circumstances. The development of educational materials based on the Mitchell family's transformation experience created opportunities for sharing their protocols with other military families, while contributing to professional literature regarding family accountability and child protection measures. The systematic documentation of their process reflected General Mitchell's commitment to institutional improvement through individual experience. The educational presentations that General Mitchell began delivering at military family support conferences provided practical guidance for other families while establishing the Mitchell family protocols as a recognized model for addressing accountability challenges involving family members whose behavior threatened vulnerable individuals. The professional recognition validated their transformation while creating additional motivation for maintaining high standards. General Mitchell's presentations regarding family accountability protocols have generated significant interest among military family support professionals seeking effective approaches to protecting vulnerable family members. Quote, the conference coordinator reported following his initial presentation, "The systematic nature of the Mitchell family transformation provides practical guidance that can be adapted by other families facing similar challenges." The positive reception of educational presentations created opportunities for expanding the family's impact beyond their immediate transformation to include contribution to institutional knowledge regarding family safety and accountability measures. The recognition positioned General Mitchell as a thought leader in military family governance while validating the effectiveness of their approach. The establishment of informal mentoring relationships with other military families facing accountability challenges provided additional opportunities for applying the knowledge and skills that the Mitchell family had developed through their transformation experience. The mentoring work reflected their commitment to supporting other families while reinforcing their own accountability standards through teaching and guidance activities. The families that sought guidance from the Mitchells represented various accountability challenges involving family members whose behavior created safety concerns for vulnerable individuals. The diversity of situations requiring intervention demonstrated the widespread nature of family dysfunction and the value of systematic approaches to addressing these challenges. The Mitchell family's willingness to mentor other families demonstrates their understanding that transformation creates opportunities and obligations for supporting others facing similar challenges. Dr. Chen observed during consultation sessions that evaluated the family's expanding influence. Their commitment to sharing knowledge and expertise reflects mature understanding of the responsibilities that accompany successful recovery from family dysfunction. The mentoring relationships provided additional validation for the effectiveness of the Mitchell family protocols, while creating opportunities for refining their approaches based on experience with different family dynamics and accountability challenges. The expanding application of their methods strengthened their confidence while contributing to continuous improvement of their systems. The financial investment required for maintaining professional consultation services, training programs, and documentation systems represented significant ongoing commitment that demonstrated the family's recognition that preventing future crises justified substantial resource allocation. The continued expense served as additional motivation for maintaining accountability standards, while providing access to expertise that supported their ongoing development. The cost-benefit analysis that General Mitchell conducted regarding their investment in professional services demonstrated that the expense of prevention was substantially lower than the potential costs of future crises involving child welfare, legal intervention, and family relationship damage. The economic justification reinforced the family's commitment to maintaining their accountability protocols. The Mitchell family's investment in professional support services represents recognition that effective family governance requires ongoing expertise and systematic attention rather than informal management through good intentions. Dr. Chen explained during consultation sessions that evaluated the sustainability of their approach. Their commitment to continued professional development demonstrates understanding that maintaining healthy family dynamics requires systematic effort and resource allocation. The documentation of cost-effectiveness provided additional evidence for the value of systematic accountability measures while creating potential guidance for other families considering similar investments in professional support for family transformation. The economic analysis supported advocacy for institutional support for family accountability programs within military family support networks. The momentum that had developed through successful implementation of accountability protocols created opportunities for expanding the family's influence, while maintaining focus on their primary objective of protecting vulnerable family members and supporting authentic relationships based on mutual respect and appropriate boundaries. The growing recognition of their transformation provided platforms for contributing to broader institutional improvement while reinforcing their own commitment to continued growth and development. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.